Welcome to Unschooling Conversations. Today I'm joined by Chen, and in this episode we are going to discuss her recently published book Untigering, Peaceful Parenting for the Deconstructing Tiger Parent. I'm Heidi Steel. I'm a former teacher and unschooling parent to 4 school-aged children who are happy living and learning as they go. I've been unschooling for almost 10 years. And I blog regularly, and I organise coaching and mentoring services on unschooling, which you can find out more about at liveplaylearn.org. So hi Iris, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about the book maybe, or the work that you're involved in?
So I am Iris Chen, and I wrote a book called Untigering. And that just has been a process of me moving away from tiger parenting, which is like this very controlling, has a lot of rules, this power over dynamic with children, and then seeing the negative effects of that in my own life and in the lives of my children, and realizing that I wanted to move away from that towards peaceful parenting, towards much more of a partnership type of model. And through that process also discovered unschooling, and have been unschooling for about 3 or 4 years now. And that really accelerated my process of peaceful parenting, actually, because just understanding more about autonomy and respect and how to work with our children instead of assuming that we as the adults know what's best and can, impose these rules and control over our children. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Excellent. So could you, if you would like to, tell us maybe how old your children are, and if, I know often these things are like a ongoing thing, but was there a catalyst, a point where you said, this the parenting style I'm using, this isn't working, or it's not for us, or was there a single event or a series of events that led you to that point?
Mm-hmm. My kids are about to turn 11 and 13 in February, so I think it was definitely a process for me, but there were moments when some aha moments for me, and one that I write about in my book is when I went to a parenting workshop, and then the speaker was just talking about neurobiology and understanding our children's brains and how they develop and how they respond to different types of parenting, and how when we parent them with control or with yelling or punishment and all those things, how their brains respond, and they become very overstimulated and unable to calm themselves down. And I think that really woke me up to the fact that the way that I was responding to my children's behavior was creating this storm and this overstimulation in their brain. And so I was part of the problem. I was not helping them to calm down. And I think just when that clicked, I was able to dig deeper into peaceful parenting and understand all the science behind it, but also understand how to reframe behavior and not always see it as something that I need to react to and punish and try to control, but through eyes of understanding, through eyes of empathy. And that was a huge turning point for me, where I realized that what I was doing was really creating the problem and exacerbating it, and that I needed to change.
So one of the things that I found when we moved into peaceful parenting was you have all this personal experience of how to parent the way that you are then replicating with your own children. You have, this experience from your own life, and there are, a fair number of books or people that will, tell you to continue parenting that way. And so one of the things you do in the book is give some guidance or some pointers maybe in terms of, well, if we're not doing that, like what are we doing? What do we do instead? And that foundational point of relationship that you take in the book is then also what is key in unschooling as well. You know, it's about relationship, it's about walking with our children, it's about being in partnership, you know, with our children. And, you know, when you were talking about emotions, then it was, you know, and behavior, that those things our children go through, you know, we say behavior is communication. You know, they're not being bad and they're not being naughty or disruptive or rude. They're actually, that in terms of neurobiology, it's their way of communicating something else. And do you want to explain maybe a little bit about, you know, what do we do instead when we are peaceful parenting?
So I feel like, you know, the traditional or mainstream type of parenting really is often about behavior management, you know, where parents are just taught like how to deal with behavior and see things on a very surface level. Whereas like you mentioned, it is very relational. And how can we see parenting in a relational paradigm instead of a hierarchical, authoritarian paradigm, right? So I think just as we build relationship and trust with anybody else in our lives, you know, our partners, our friends, that we have those same that same lens and that those same tools, if you can call it that. So, you know, just connection, I think, is so foundational to our relationship with our kids, where we just find ways to show them that we love them and enjoy them and spend time with them, right? So oftentimes when we build in that connection and where our children feel safe and secure in our love and our relationship for them, a lot of times the behaviors, you know, resolve themselves because their needs are being met. So I think like instead of sort of attacking certain behaviors in a very direct way, oftentimes it's like digging deeper underneath the surface to meet those needs for connection and safety, belonging, security, and significance, and all those things. Then a lot of times there's like the peace just naturally flows out of that because their needs are being met. There is that connection and that trust.
Thank you. Funnily enough, I was trying to find a quote in the book, which I have found, which I really like, but I'll come to it in a minute, because as I was flicking through, I just went past the page that what this book is not. It is not a how-to book about how to get your kids to behave or change. Yes, so I just thought I'd mention that in case people got the impression that it was a step-by-step guide, but that's not what the book is. But this quote is actually in your introduction, but I really like it. It says, "There is no need to feel shame or frustration at an impossible ideal. We will fail. We won't always live up to our principles, but we can continue to grow and move in the direction of our vision. There is no other choice for those of us who seek to parent without oppression. We must do the work." And I know I've heard you say before, you know, that's the concept of untigering, that we don't sort of reach this destination and we become this sort of perfect, peaceful parenting, you know, ideal. That it's a process that we go through in our relationship, rebuilding with our children. But it's something that we have to go through personally, sort of sometimes a very day by day or even moment by moment process. There's a part in the book where you talk about playing alongside our children and you know, joining them in their everyday, and I think you used the term silly, that sometimes their games are silly, and it really resonated with me because you know, as adults, we can often find children playing alongside our children cumbersome, maybe, you know, a little bit we don't quite have the same passion for it as they bring to the game. And you use this term silly, and I thought, wow, that's what I've been looking for this whole time, is that actually that's what I often think. I'm not very good at the silly aspect of playing alongside my children. So what do we do when we come across an aspect that we find challenging in peaceful parenting, which I guess you could ask anybody who's a parent, but when we are committed to this idea, this ideal about how we want to interact with our children, what do we do when we find something that's challenges us?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think to welcome all of it, welcome all the challenges. When things make us uncomfortable, that's where growth happens. If we're just doing whatever makes us comfortable, then we're not really growing, and we're not, trying new things and exploring new ideas. And so I think it's okay that it feels uncomfortable and it feels unnatural. I mean, especially coming from a tiger parenting mindset, and I'm generally a pretty serious person in general, play feels very unnatural to me. I knew how to study, I knew how to work, I knew how to be productive, but in terms of play and silliness, it doesn't feel natural for me. So I think it's just okay to do it and feel awkward doing it and continue to press into that. And because part of it, I think, is that feeling of incompetence or that feeling of awkwardness, and how we sort of need to embrace that feeling, because we're always told that we should feel like we're good at something, or that it should come easy to us, and those are actually not truths. That doesn't actually, that's not a growth mindset. So how can we be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of trying new things? And that doesn't mean that we don't have to do all these different things just because somebody else is doing them. I know a parent who is just very active and always takes her kids out, and they're always doing fun things. And for me and my kids, we're happy being at home and, just chilling out. And so again, with that unschooling mindset, it really is about who we are and who our kids are, and finding a way to live in alignment with that, instead of needing to do what other people tell us to do just because it works for them. But even with the whole silliness aspect, it's we don't all have to be the life of the party. We don't always have to be we don't have to love an imaginative play if it's not our thing. We can find ways to connect and play with our kids in ways that make sense for us, and in ways that make sense for our kids, because not all kids love that either, right? Yeah. So again, it's about the relationship. It's about finding what works for all of us, instead of feeling like we have to do certain things just because they're peaceful parenting.
Yeah, I mean, in our house, my husband is definitely the silly one. And so if that's, what's on the cards for the day or for the moment, he's really good at it. And that's what, that's his forte. And whilst I do have moments when I think, okay, I need to join in with this silly, and I do, like you say, it's not my forte. And I've got to a point now where I personally don't feel that I have to be doing those things, because I have other skill sets that I bring to the relationship. But at the same time, my children really appreciate it when I do join in and when I can join in. And I have had to, part of that, like you say, that growth mindset of realizing there doesn't have to be a purpose to this game. I think that's what I personally find tricky with the idea of being silly. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? It can just be because we're having fun together. And my children, that's what they want. They want the relational aspect. They just want me to join in. They're not really, they're not grading me on how silly I can be, or, what the purpose of this activity that is. They just want to play with me. So if I can get over that little hurdle, then that's great. But as you say, everyone's different. So again, if my husband's around, it's going to be him who joins in the silly, because it's a much better fit, I think, is the way of putting it. But one of the things I like in the book is that you address this issue of when our parenting styles are vastly different to those that the way that our parents parented us, and how you sort of talk through how to navigate that with your own parents, when there's this sort of rift in our parenting style, but yet they are still family, and we still seek to be in relationship with them. And I think that's a really tricky thing to navigate. So I guess my question is really, how do we do that? Where do we start?
I wrote in my book a chapter about that, I guess, and I really start with how we need to understand our own stories. So to sort of go back to how we were parented and our own childhood and the ways that our parents parented us, and to take time to grieve the things that we need to grieve and to process, and to, heal those inner childhood wounds. And that's definitely like an ongoing process for us. But I think it's important to do that because oftentimes the choices that we're making for our family now are very much tied to our past and the way we're responding to our childhood wounds. And so it's very important for us to just take the time to dig a little deeper and understand our own pains, and to really grieve them, to make room for however we feel about them. And then also to understand our parents' stories. I think that's one thing that I wrote about as well. Mm-hmm. It's like understanding more about their history and what they grew up with, because they are also, reacting out of their own experiences as children and throughout their lives. And so coming to a place of compassion and empathy for them. Mm-hmm. And yet what I say is also that we get to write the rest of our story. So we need to understand, our past story and understand our parents' stories. But from here on out, we get to sort of control the narrative and that arc of where we want the rest of our story to go. So instead of allowing our past and our parents' stories to define the narrative for us, that we can sort of take charge of that from this point on and create a different arc. And our parents' stories and the patterns that we grew up with don't have to define the rest of the story. And so I think, if we're in a place where there is like a lot of tension with our parenting style and the way our parents parented us, I think there's room for boundaries where we have to, just draw a line, because we are needing to think about future generations too, right? It's not just how can I make things comfortable in the moment, but how can we break some patterns? How can we leave some of the toxic, generational things behind so that we can create something new for the future generations? And so sometimes we have to draw a line in the sand and just, create some boundaries and say, we're not bringing this forward with the next generation. And that is difficult, It is hard, and it can often cause, tension or a rift in our relationships with our parents. But, I think everybody has to make that choice for themselves, what they're comfortable with and what they're willing to sacrifice. Either way, you're sacrificing something, right? You're either sacrificing like the status quo and, this sort of peace where you avoid the tension, or you're sacrificing living truthfully and authentically and breaking that pattern for the next generation. So all of us have to decide, what are we willing to sacrifice, and what are we willing to draw the line in the sand for?
Yeah, I think I really just appreciated that you had included it in the book as part of the process and as part of the reality of us parenting differently to, the way our parents probably, generally speaking, parented us. And that idea of just acknowledging our parents' own stories and really understanding that, the choices they made were in the context of everything that they, where they were in society at the time and their upbringing and the things influencing their lives, and understanding that from their viewpoint. But also having this sort of compassionate empathy for them, but also for yourselves, and actually saying, I can understand that, but actually this is where we are drawing our line, and this is what we are doing. And I think it's quite a skill to be able to do that. And like you say, this untigering process, it's a process, that you have to keep revisiting over and over again in order to be able to hopefully maintain relations, within your wider family. So talking about things that you put in the book that were a surprise, you move at the end of the book to talking about how our parenting really can influence wider society. And I'm not sure really what my question is. Maybe we could start with, why did you include that in the book?
Sure. I think because sometimes when we think about parenting, it's very through like this individualistic mindset, and we're very much, it's like all about what's happening within your nuclear family, and it's just between you and your child or whatever. But just realizing that, as a society, we are all connected to each other, and definitely the ways that we parent our children, the way that we were parented, influences who we are and influences the way that we engage with the world. And so just knowing, that children who are raised in a very authoritarian, domineering environment, it creates a society that becomes very authoritarian and, leans toward fascism or whatever it is. Whereas, those who are raised with respect and autonomy and connection and all those things, then go out into the world and expect those things from the society around them, and will engage with the world in that way. And so I totally believe that the way that we parent I don't believe that parenting is a private thing. It's definitely a political thing, where whatever we do within our homes also ripples out into society and into the way we, affect the world and influence the world. And the inverse or converse or whatever is true as well, where whatever is happening in society also affects the way that we parent. And so I think we need to take all of that into consideration, where the stresses of society, if parents are forced to work long hours every day, or if they're facing, issues of racism or food insecurity or all of those things, we cannot say that those things don't affect the way we interact with our children. All those stresses that we have in society affect the way that we either approach our children with trying to protect them, or with fear for their safety and all those things. So I think, just as we are trying to parent in a way to influence society, we also have to sort of engage in the bigger social issues that do affect our lives and our parenting. And so we have to think about those things through that lens as well, where we're trying to, create that systemic change as well as our personal change.
Yeah, so you talk about specifically about things like racism in the book. You talk, you use the word meritocracy, which is a great word, and I love it. That idea that when we teach our or when our children live in an environment where competition is important and hierarchy is important, that we create this system where some people are inevitably worth more or less than others based on their qualifications or the amount of money they have or the colour of their skin. And you address these in the end of the book. And I just love the idea of how, firstly, how when we parent our children in such a way where they are valued and respected and heard, that when they go out into the wider world, that's what they expect from the wider world. But also that we can apply those principles to whoever we are in contact with and have relationship, our neighbours, our community, community groups, our families. We can apply those same principles to those people, and in that way we are having an impact on that even those little communities. But like you say, it's that ripple effect, isn't it? That ripple effect of being able to say to someone, you are valuable and have worth just because you are, and then for them to take that on board and sort of hopefully and maybe pass it to the next person. So I really, again, appreciated the way that you included that in the discussion of untigering and our parenting, and not just seeing it as an isolated concept. So we've talked a little bit on and off about unschooling and peaceful parenting. As far as I'm concerned, peaceful parenting is kind of key to unschooling because it's about relationship. And although we call it unschooling, which puts this educational sort of veneer on it, really it's about building relationship with our children, and then everything else sort of grows from there. Really, I find it quite challenging to explain, but our children feel so secure with their family relations that it just provides this really strong foundation for their learning to flourish, is a word I like to use. So you said you've been unschooling for about 3 years, is that right?
Since 2000, I guess it's more like 4 years now. I can't keep track. See, just like, when we don't have those grades and sort of like measure, it just sort of all flows in together. But yeah, at least 3 years, maybe 4 or more. Yeah.
So sort of which came first? Did you sort of move into peaceful parenting first, or did you hear about unschooling first? Or, which one sort of led into the other for you?
I think definitely I was sort of exploring more about peaceful parenting. And then as I was exploring different options, because I was living in China at the time, the schooling options for my kids were pretty limited, and I was exploring homeschooling, but I wanted to do it in a way that, didn't tear our family apart. So discovered unschooling, really resonated with it. But I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, I feel like unschooling really accelerated my deep dive into peaceful parenting, because it really forces it forced me to question all the ways that I still felt justified in using control over my kids, which is, even a lot of peaceful parents, when it comes to schooling or education, still feel like, things have to be done this way, but unschooling sort of like, just unpeeled all of that, deconstructed a lot of that, and made me question a lot of the other areas, actually, where I was trying to use control over them. And so, yeah, it was sort of like this convergence of both peaceful parenting and unschooling, but I feel like it's so connected. I do feel that unschooling is just peaceful parenting lived out, in all areas of our life. And I'm really grateful for unschooling and how that has, because it is even more radical than, just what we might consider peaceful parenting, because it really forces us to look at the different ways that we still engage in power over our children. And for childhood, much of that is related to school. So much of childhood in mainstream society is related to school and learning and education and trying to get our kids, to do the things that the school tells them to do. And so to unpack all of that has been really, just a powerful experience in helping me to really internalize these ideas of peaceful parenting even more.
Is there anything else you would like to particularly mention about the book for us? Anything that you would like to bring to the podcast?
I think one thing, one reason that I wrote the book in particular, and I don't know if this is relevant for your audience, but especially as an Asian American, especially as a person of color, that it was really important for me to write from that lens, to write from, just like the position of centering my own story and my own experiences as an Asian person, as somebody who lived in both China and in the States and in North America, to ground this experience, this learning in my cultural context. And so, hoping that other people, other Asians and other people of color can see that these ideas are not just Western, because tiger parenting is typically associated with Asian parenting. That's the stereotype. And like peaceful parenting feels very frou-frou and very, like granola or whatever, things that a lot of Asian Americans may not connect with and relate to. But just for me, writing this and sharing my story, hopefully it can really connect and share that these ideas and these principles are really like cross-cultural. They are about our humanity and our shared humanity, and how can we, begin to shift some of those traditions and some of the thinking that we are, those stereotypes, in order to change and shift culture, whether that's like the bigger culture or our, ethnic backgrounds or whatever it is, to to be involved in shifting the narrative for our culture as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been really lovely to meet you and chat with you. So Iris's book, Untigering, is currently available. Do you know where it's available from, Iris?
Yes, it's available on Amazon.
Excellent.
So wherever you get your Amazon, if it's Amazon, the UK one or the Australian one or wherever, you can find it there. For those who are in the States, I also sell directly from my website untigering.com if you want a signed copy, and if you don't want to go the Amazon route. So yeah, those are the two ways you can find my book.
Fabulous. Well, I wish you all the best with it. It's an excellent book, and there's a full review on my website at liveplaylearn.org if you want to read more about it there. But it's highly recommended by me. You can join me again in the next episode when I talk to unschooling parent Rachel Evans from Connect and Respect, and we are going to discuss deschooling. So I will see you then. Thank you for joining me, Iris.